Hello, I am Josh Stack.
Hello, hello, hello. I am Sam Fritschel. Welcome to Star Wars Deep Dive.
And before we get started, I'd like to address some of the feedback we got from our last episode. Loved it all, though I do have some notes. Okay, guys, I am. Okay, guys, gals, and. Look, the point is, I am aware that a lot of people would prefer 20 to 30 minute episodes over 1 hour ones, but these books are long. We have a lot of them to get through, and if we only did 20 to 30 minutes episodes, we'd be stuck on a single book for like a month because like okay, we don't have a set schedule, but we're not doing these every day. Sometimes
I like the hour-long episodes. Not too long, but not too short either.
and like I said, it allows us to get through the books faster because we're there might look we might only do these 2 or 3 days a week, 4 or 5 days if we're not busy, 6 or 7 if we're like really not busy, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. And because of that, there's no way we can get through these books in a reasonable amount of time if we were to do 20 to 30 minutes episodes. So we're going to stick with the 1 hour stuff. Maybe someday we'll upload 30-minute content just as.
We might do 30 minutes for a wrap-up episode.
Yes, maybe something where we, go over the book as a whole and our own thoughts and feelings about it, and recapping everything that we missed on our read through, just in case there was something. But, we gotta finish the book first, so bear with us, please. Speaking of which, we are back to The Princess, the Scout, Ellen Troll, and the Farm Boy, a retelling of the classic 1977 movie A New Hope, or as it was known as at the time, just Star Wars. But with the added twist of the first third being told from Leia's perspective, the second third from Han's perspective, and the last third from Luke's perspective. So, we're probably going to finish up Leia's perspective today, hopefully. So just please bear with us while we do so, and we hope you have fun. Oh, speaking of which, you may remember this little guy from the last episode. He's going to be important now. Meet ITO.
I remember him from the video games. He was a difficult opponent in both Star Wars video games I recently played.
Not sure why they use these things as opponents. Like, it's an interrogation droid, not a combat droid. But anyway. No, she shouted. Leia knew what that was. An interrogation droid. They were illegal, considered too inhumane for use. Starship was an idiot. Nothing was too inhumane for the Empire. This is your last chance, Your Highness, Vader warns. If you will not tell me where the plans are and where I'll find the Rebels' fortress, I will force the answers from you.
I know a few Imperials who use way too inhumane tactics to try and defeat the rebels.
Leia's breath came in a rapid burst. Holding out against interrogation had been part of her self-defense training, but this was so much worse than anything she could have imagined. Pain and humiliation could be pushed away, boxed up inside, but a truth serum? There was nowhere to run. Leia bolted toward the door, but Vader's arms locked around her, swinging her back into the interrogation droid's path. The pain that lanced through her arm as the needle punctured her skin and the serum seeped into her system was unbearable. She collapsed back against the wall, shaking her head. It felt light enough to float away. Her vision blurred at the edges, making her feel as if she were walking through an early morning fog on the palace grounds, the soft sunlight warming her skin. But no, that wasn't right. Leia wasn't on Alderaan. A voice floated to her through the clouds. Your Highness, you're safe. You can trust me. If anyone's curious, this is actually an adaptation of a scene from the radio drama, which you can find on YouTube for free, but it is very long, so probably not worth checking out unless you're a major Star Wars fan like us. Leia shook her head, turning her face against something cold, hard, smooth. Cell. She was in a cell on the... Why couldn't she hold on to a thought? Her pulse was pounding in her ears again. She pressed her hands against them. Not safe, not safe, not safe. Death Star. The words floated up to the front of her mind. That's where she was, not on Alderaan.
Yeah, the Death Star, not the Death Star Pro, which has 3 super lasers and looks like the Death Star and an iPhone got together.
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, classic joke. That's where she was, not on Alderaan. The thought made pain streak through her, made her dizzy. Why wouldn't it stop? Where was her father? She wanted her father. I'm with the Rebel Alliance, the voice continued. I need to know what you did with the Death Star plans. You must tell me. You must trust me. There was a bad taste in her mouth, a pounding in her skull. Leia was so sure she was going to be sick, she bent at the waist, ignoring the way fire seemed to stream through her blood. Words popped like bubbles in her mind. Interrogation. Death. Star. Vader. We need them, Leia. Tell me where to find the plants. Leave me alone. Interrogation. Rebels. Can't tell the truth. Don't tell the truth. Antilles. Tanti 4, Alderaan, Senate Galaxy. Slowly, as if stretching after a long sleep, her mind started to sharpen. Leia remembered where she was, even with her head feeling light enough to float away, her lips loose enough to spill every secret she protected. Trained. She'd been trained. You'll be forced to give information, her instructor had said. Truthful information. But it doesn't have to be current information. There's always a way to give a truth that's related, but not the answer they want. Find a connection. Where are the plans? The voice exploded in her ears, loud enough to make Leia cringe. I don't have them, she shouted. I don't have them. Where are they? I don't have them, she repeated. Where did you send them? Where is the rebel base? Without warning, the fire in Leia's body was blown out, replaced by an icy grip. Fear wound its way through her, snaking down into her stomach.
I remember something similar to this experience. There, during the Old Republic, there was this healer who would not give the Sith what he wanted, so the Sith decided to torture his daughter to force the healer to give up his secrets.
Fortunately, Leia wasn't captured alongside anyone else. That would have been bad for her. I don't think she would have been able to endure that. The feeling was so different from the lightheaded dream of the serum. There was power behind each of his words. Oh yeah, Vader has minor telepathic abilities, in case you were curious. They nudged at her. They prodded as sharply as any knife. So Leia did the only thing she could. She pulled back, physically toward the wall, mentally to a place the voice couldn't find her. An unfamiliar warmth wrapped around her, a protective blanket that didn't let any of the darkness nudge through. The freezing pressure on her mind was thrown back. The rumbling voice made a sound of surprise and was quiet for a long moment. Vader is impressed. If you do not tell me where to find the rebels, lives will be lost. All of the rebel deaths will be on your head. Leave me alone, Leia repeated, throwing her arms up over her head. Your father wants you to trust us, the voice said, softer now.
Speaking of power inside a Sith's voice, I've heard of Sith that are so powerful that when they spoke, planets died.
Probably just hyperbole, but you never know. Your father wants you to trust us, the voice said, softer now. He wants you to tell us where to find the rebels. He's worried about you. He wants you to come home. Alderaan is my home. That was true. Are you a member of the Rebel Alliance? I mean, I don't know why he needs her to say it. There's a lot of evidence. Leia swallowed the disgusting taste in the back of her mouth, blinking as the cell began to take shape again around her. Vader was a black blur against the crimson ceiling lights. Not safe. I'm Princess Leia Organa, she said. I'm the senator from Alderaan. And that was the truth. Vader stepped back, watching her as stillly and silently as any poisonous snake about to strike. He began to turn, signaling something to the security officers. Leia slumped back against the metal cot in relief. They were leaving. It was over. Careful, Vader warns. If you continue to resist, soon you will be neither. The cell door hissed shut behind him. Chapter 6. With no clock on the wall, it was easy to lose track of time. So, confirmation that clocks canonically exist in Star Wars. Despite her best efforts to stay awake, exhaustion finally wrestled her into a troubled sleep. She felt herself drift in and out of consciousness each time boots echoed down the hallway outside. The truth serum had finally left her system, which meant her stomach had stopped clenching and flipping each time she took a breath. I did it, she thought, letting pride and a small happiness warm the ice that still gripped her center. She hadn't broken under any amount of agony. There was that, at least. Even her aunts would have been impressed she had managed to keep her head in such a dangerous situation.
You know, if I was captured by the Empire, and I panicked every time footprints walked down besides my cell, basically that's why I would keep a secret hidden blaster.
Yeah, I mean, Vader probably would have found it on her anyway, but Leia didn't even try. Come on, lady, amateur. But it was a cold comfort. She was alone with the small, shivering fear that Vader could come back any second with that droid, and that next time he would try something else, and that he would finally yank the truth out of her. Had minutes passed? Hours? Day? I can do it again, she told herself. I can make it. She knew that as long as she stayed in her cell, her life would be nothing more than a ticking clock. Confirmation that clocks canonically tick in Star Wars. There wasn't a single doubt in her mind that her father was searching for clues about what happened to her. But she couldn't sit on her hands and hope he or someone in the rebellion would put everything together. Leia had to rescue herself.
I was just thinking about the secret blaster that I would have had and how I would get it past Imperial security. Basically, the good thing is the blaster will be tiny. So when Vader searches me everywhere for the blaster, he'll find no trace of it. And I say, basically, that's because you haven't searched hard enough. I swallowed it. And here's the pill that can get it out of me.
Impressive. Most impressive. Leia had to rescue herself. The truth was, Leia couldn't predict how long Vader would keep her alive, knowing there was a chance she was connected to the rebellion. It seemed out of character for him to give her even this much time to come around. Unusually patient for someone who didn't blink at crushing a subordinate like a worm. If he was even capable of blinking, what was under that mask exactly? Leia pushed herself up, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. She was on a space station. There had to be some way for her to get to Alderaan. An officer would be too concerned with his or her next promotion to risk sympathizing with Leia, but she'd seen the surprised faces of the security officers when she'd come in. Was it possible that there were soldiers within the Empire who didn't agree with their master's policies? Leia knew that service in the military wasn't always voluntary. She's right. You'd be surprised how many members of the Empire don't fully buy into its ideals. But more stories for another day. A lot of them, by the way. The heavy steps outside her cell door interrupted the new plan forming in her mind. For a moment, Leia convinced that she could feel the ground shake, but maybe that was just her own fright playing tricks on her. No more than a moment later, she heard the familiar click and whoosh of Vader's respirator. Then, the door opens. Leia jumped to her feet, but neither Darth Vader nor the two security officers with him actually stepped inside. Follow me, Vader's cloak flew out behind him as he turns. Equal parts curious and nervous, Leia took a tentative step outside of her cell.
Oh yeah, speaking of propaganda, here is how the Imperial recruits stormtroopers. Hey look, propaganda! Propaganda is cool! Yeah, propaganda never lies. Let's join the Empire! Then, this is how stormtroopers leave the Empire. The propaganda lied. The Empire is not cool. We're defecting to the rebellion.
Tale as old as the franchise, really. Leia took a tentative step outside of her cell. Were they transporting her again? Taking her to some kind of trial? Or is this the moment they'd get rid of her once and for all? The security officer snapped binders over her wrist, tight enough to make Leia cringe. Without a word of explanation, they led her through the detention block, boots clicking on the mental walkway, in time with the throbbing headache behind her eyes. The burn of the outer hallway's bright lights was unbearable. Everything on the ship was shining and new, gleaming with evil intentions. Vader caught her by the shoulder as they approached two towering metal doors. They slid open at his signal, a whisper of a sound that faded into silence. That was what struck Leia first, the quiet. There were dozens of men and women in black uniforms and helmets seated along a stretch of control panels that held too many glowing buttons and levers even to attempt to count. Over their heads, more panels blinked with red and white lights. It was the control room, Leia realized, the overbridge. They had walked her into the nerve center of the Death Star. But why would they show her this? At the opposite end of the chamber, an enormous screen blinked to life, illuminating the officer standing in front of it. Of course it would be him. Governor Tarkin, Leia began with her sweetest face. I should have expected to find you holding Vader's leash. I recognized your foul stench when I was brought on board.
Oof, it's gotta hurt.
The very first thing Leia's father had ever told her about Grand Moff Williff Tarkin was that she was to stay away from him. He had made an official visit to Alderaan right around the time Leia had turned 13, which coincidentally was about the time when Leia had made it her mission to do the opposite of whatever she was told to do. That's actually canon, by the way. Like, there's a comic about it and everything. So she'd crept along the halls of the palace behind the two men, listening to the cold, tense words they exchanged. As she'd slipped out of her hiding place, one thought had blasted through her mind. He is a snake. Hey, Leia, the galaxy is full of reptilian species. Don't compare Tarkin to them. That's insulting to every reptilian humanoid that ever slithered his way through the galaxy. Or perb, or there. A man who kept slaves. A man who wrapped around his victims.
I know an extraterrestrial alien species that would take offense to that. But we'll get to them much later. We have them listed on one of the many books we're going to do.
Yep. A man who wrapped around his victims and slowly, mercilessly crushed the life from them. The cold, sharp edges of his heart were reflected in the lines of his face. As the years had gone on and he'd aged into his ugly cruelty, he was actually quite handsome back in the day, at least in my opinion. His skin had pulled tight against his skull. Cheekbones. His steely blue eyes could assess a person's worth in a single glance, and the perpetually sour expression on his face showed that he always found the person lacking.
Thrawn was actually much more handsome than Tarkin. Smarter, too.
Yeah, I could say that Tarkin's one of those it's better to be feared than loved guys, but let's face it, he never wanted to be loved. Behind him, a beautiful emerald green planet filled the screen, glowing with life. Leia felt her chest clench at the sight of it.
Tarkin's father never loved him. Isn't that sad? Well, yes, it is sad, but Tarkin can hug himself when he gets to his quarters.
Don't feel too bad for the guy. He's done some messed up nonsense. That was Alderaan. They must have traveled there after bringing her aboard. That was her home, the site she'd been longing to see from the moment she'd left it. Despite everything, she was floating on a bubble of excitement. Were they really releasing her then? Charming to the last, Tarkin said with a look that would have caused a freshly bloomed rose to wither. Alright, I promise I won't do this every time, but roses canonically exist in Star Wars.
Also, I don't think they'll be releasing Leia. There's such a thing called the Imperial Resentencing Directive, which is making up false sentences.
They're the worst. Sean, you don't know how hard I found it signing the order to terminate your life? Apparently not. They probably should have just, Nah, I'll save that for later. A jolt of fear shot through her. Leia had expected they might kill her, of course, but it was one thing to think it and another to hear it promised so casually, the way someone would announce what was for supper. I'm surprised you had the courage to take the responsibility yourself, she shot back. There. His eye gave a small twitch. Leia tilted her head to the side, her lips twisted into a smirk. Very few things made her happier than getting a rise out of despicable old men who wanted everyone around them to cower in their presence. These men wanted her to beg for her life, to tremble and cry. It was time to let her hatred fly, to show them once and for all she was not that girl. She was not that little princess. However did you choose the method of my demise without the Emperor there to pat you on the head when you finished? Okay, yeah, that's a good one. That is a very good one.
Oh yeah, I know a few. Yeah, I know another Imperial officer who would really love to get pat on the head, to get a pat on the head from the Emperor.
A lot of them, actually. You'd be surprised how many ladies had a crush on Palpatine. I I don't get it. I really do not get it. The governor clasped his hands together in front of him, angling his face back toward the screen. Another officer stepped up beside him, struggling to master his smirk at her words. He was younger than Tarkin, his face stirring some memory at the back of Leia's mind. Admiral Mahdi. By the way, Mahdi's full name is Conan Antonio Mahdi.
He has an entire section in the Imperial Handbook about fleets and formations.
Very high ranking, very important. Wonderful. No wonder the Death Star was so big and needed to be to house some of the largest egos in the galaxy. And also because there's like millions of people on there, but that'll be important later. Princess Leia, before your execution, I would like you to be my guest at a ceremony that will make this battle station operational. He was so smug, so sure of himself. There wasn't a single aspect of Tarkin that didn't make Leia's skin want to crawl right off her bones. No star system will dare oppose the Emperor now. The more you tighten your grip, Leia warned, the more star systems will slip through your fingers. Not after we demonstrate the power of this station. The little smirk he gave her made Leia want to take a small step back. A man like him didn't smile unless he was about to get a taste of blood. In a way, you have determined the choice of the planets that'll be destroyed first. Since you are reluctant to provide us with the location of the rebel base, I have chosen to test the station's destructive power on your home planet of Alderaan. The truth whipped through her, cracking her wide open with terror. No, Alderaan's peaceful. We have no weapons. You can't possibly... They couldn't. Alderaan was one of the central planets. The galaxy depended on its wealth and on innovation. There were billions of innocent lives down there.
Alderaan actually was a war zone during the years of the Old Republic, but it's become peaceful in more modern years. Peaceful, not really. Beautiful, oh, definitely.
And as one of the founding members of the Republic, it is very important and has great historical significance. By the way, 2 billion, just in case you're wondering how many lives are at stake here. You would prefer another target, a military target? Then name the system, Tarkin said. Where is the rebel base?
Another thing about Alderaan is it's one of the 7 jewel planets, along with the other planets which all start with the name At.
I'm pretty sure it's not, but
Well, it definitely should be one of the jewel planets. I mean, it's very important to the Old Republic.
that I can agree with. Leia glanced at the officer sitting at the controls of the station, disbelief slung inside her. How could they follow orders like this? She pulled back, trying to hide her face so they wouldn't see that panic had drained every last drop of blood from it. But Vader was like a wall behind her, and Tarkin stepped up in front of her, trying to get her to cower. A version of the truth, she thought. Old information. The location would be believable, and she wouldn't run the risk of giving them a planet they had already checked and found clear of rebel activity. It didn't matter that she'd be confirming her involvement with the rebellion once and for all, not if it meant saving her planets. She would have fought through years of war to help the rebellion, but she would die for her home. Dantooine, Leia said softly, lowering her head. They're on Dantooine. Dantooine shows up a lot throughout the rest of the franchise, most notably in the first Knights of the Old Republic game, but if I explained the full significance of each planet that even gets name dropped to the franchise, we'd be here all day.
Dantooine is a wasteland now because of so many wars during the years of the Old Republic.
Some say the planet's cursed. And yeah, I can see it. There, you see, Lord Vader, she can be reasonable. Tarkin toward Admiral Mahdi. Continue with the operation.
Oh yeah, I would also like to point out that in Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, when asked where the Jedi Enclave is, which is on Dantooine, you could flip the script and say, the Jedi Enclave, and lie by saying, the Jedi Enclave is on Alderaan.
Cute little reference. Continue with the operation. You may fire when ready. What? Leia cried. I gave you what you wanted. You can't do this. You're far too trusting, Tarkin said, giving a dismissive wave. Dantooine is too remote to make an effective demonstration, but don't worry. We will deal with your rebel friends soon enough. Okay, bad call on Tarkin's parts. Like, this is gonna be... Well, you know what? Let's go over it at the end of the chapter, shall we?
Yeah.
No, Leia begged. Please, commence primary ignition, one of the officers said, leaning forward over his section of the console to push one of a dozen lit buttons on the panel. Next to him, another officer reached up to pull a lever. Excuse me. The low, eerie hum vibrated through the floor, through Leia's skin. She felt it in her teeth. Vader's grip on her tightened as a green beam appeared in the viewports. Leia sucked in a horrified gasp, struggling against him, trying to do something, anything to... The beam of light raced toward her planet, ripping through the blackness of space. There was a single moment when everything around Leia seemed to suspend. She didn't breathe, didn't move, couldn't feel. And then, the planet gleaming like a gemstone in front of her exploded, tearing apart in a burst of fiery light, sending debris scattering into a molten hot ring. She could imagine how it happened, how the light must have appeared in the crystal blue sky for just a moment, how the mountains had dissolved into dust. Billions of lives gone in the blink of an eye. Her home, her family. She stood there, seconds feeling like hours. She shook her head again. There was no way. Alderaan couldn't be gone. It was all a show. Some strange illusion that the Empire had crafted to try to break her. Another interrogation tactic. But then why would they have done it after she had given them the information they were looking for? Why were the fragments of the planet's core still shooting out around them?
I know a guy who would be a great master of illusions, who works in the Empire, but I don't see him anywhere in the Death Star, so this is definitely real.
Yep. Still shooting out around them, blazing paths across the void of space. It was real. The cold numbness that had gripped her suddenly snapped. In its place was a burning, bottomless anger. And here comes another part that's from the radio drama. Leia screamed, trying to rip herself out of Vader's grip to claw at Tarkin's face with every ounce of fury radiating from her center. Vader still held her firmly, letting her struggle against his iron grip. You call yourselves human? She snarled.
Oh yeah, also, while the Empire did destroy Alderaan, they still couldn't get rid of the bug infestation on the planet. Also, you maniacs! You blew it up!
But we'll get to the insectoids later. Tarkin merely gave her a bored look, then turned to Vader. Take her back to her cell to await termination. Sedate her if you must. In hindsight, they probably should have just shot her right there. It'll end poorly for them.
That will happen in another book we'll review, but that'll be way far in the future.
There was no need. Her shocked rage flared so bright, so hot that it burned out before she could really make use of it. And once it was gone, she was left with nothing but numb disbelief. Her home, her family, everything. Didn't feel real, any of it. Her mother, her father, her aunts, her people, the gardens, her room, the libraries, the arts, the beautiful, blooming life. The Empire needed to take her instead. She would do anything to bring it all back. She would trade herself, anything, if they could undo what they'd done. You know that's impossible, a small voice whispered in her mind. Nothing would bring her home back. No amount of bargaining would fix this. It was over. They must have dragged her back to her cell. Leia didn't remember. Her legs gave out the moment she was through the cell door. The next thing she knew, her cheek was pressed against the cold metal grating on the floor. Her fingers curled around it, but Princess Leia Organa of Alderaan, for the first time in her life, couldn't bring herself to push herself back onto her feet. Princess Leia. Were you still a princess if your home world was gone? In a matter of hours, she'd lost her position in the Senate, her home, and every plan she'd made. For the first time in her life, Leia didn't know what to do. The senator didn't have a plan. The princess didn't have a history. All that was left was just Leia. She closed her eyes, trying to picture her parents' faces. Her body shook with the effort to keep her tears back.
There were a lot of people that witnessed the destruction of Alderaan and defected because of it. Two examples are Thane Krell and Tycho Selju.
But we'll read about them later, much later. She closed her eyes, trying to picture her parents' faces. Her body shook with the effort to keep her tears back. She folded the pain away, the anguish. She had to. She had made a promise to her father as he'd seen her and the crew of the Tantai 4 of that last time. I won't fail you. But hadn't she? No. No. Leia pushed her chest off the ground, sitting up. Failing would be giving up, because somewhere out in the desert, there was a droid carrying the hope for the future inside of him. There were allies counting on her, allies who needed to know the truth about the Death Star and the tremendous danger they were in. It wouldn't be the same, but she could still fight. She had a place with the Rebel Alliance. Leia took a deep breath, her father's voice whispering in her mind. Taking on all these responsibilities, they've shaped you into a glittering star. Maybe she had misunderstood what he meant, after all. Her father hadn't been a man who prided himself on his riches or owning beautiful things. He didn't value gems or credits, and he didn't often fall back on poetic flattery. After all, above all, he admired strength. And hell's was stars formed but through a collision of pressure and heat, an explosion of energy. The formation of a star shaped the space around it. It could be seen from millions of kilometers away. She stood up, straightening to her full height, and began to look around her again, searching for her outs. They could think they'd taken the parts of her that mattered most, that they'd broken her. There was a part of Leia that the Emperor, Vader, Tarkin, any of them could never touch. Her heart was a star that would never burn out, and she would outshine them all. Alright, so, quick digression. So, yeah, the destruction of the Empire of Alderaan had the opposite effect from what Tarkin intended, and the Empire would need to do major work covering things up. And they would try all manner of cover-ups, almost all of which were contradictory, obvious lies, and so on and so forth. You know, interestingly enough, one of the video games portrays a rebel fleet as attempting to save Alderaan and being easily destroyed by the Death Star's escort fleet, but I don't think that's canon.
It's probably not. Also, many years later, Leia will experience and feel the destruction of more planets, but that will be many years in the future, and that act will be done by Darksiders.
In the meantime, okay, I'm gonna quick head to the bathroom. Sam, we're getting to Han Solo. Introduce our new scoundrel.
All right. So, we have had the princess done for our first part of this book. For the next part, we're working on introducing the scoundrel. Scoundrel's name is Han Solo. He was born on the planet Corellia, joined the Empire just so he could be a pilot, but was kicked out of the Imperial Flight Academy because he was too inventive, because he didn't play by the rules. So when he was forced in the Imperial Army, he deserted, found a Wookiee, and they decided, forget the Empire, forget the Rebellion, forget their wars, let's just go make profit.
And that brings us to here. Nice looking ship, isn't it? Chapter 7. Nothing like a severed limb flying through the air to break up a perfectly good day in a cantina. No blasters, the barkeep called. Panicked. No blasters! Thank the stars, Han thought. Otherwise no one would walk out of there alive. For a single heartbeat, the thick herbal smoke that layered the air seemed to part. The band's cheerful music cut out. The shouts in basic and what had to be every other language in the galaxy faded to a whimper. For the first time in Chalmun's Cantina's long history of hosting the rowdiest pirates Mos Eisley had to offer, there was absolute silence. Fun fact, Chalmun is another Wookiee. Then everyone went back to their business and the pulse of life returned. The band, Fig and Dan and the Modal Nodes, a group of Bith with dome-shaped heads and black glassy eyes, started bopping away on their instruments again.
Sorry about the mess. Jedi business, go back to your drinks.
And I'm sure you're all familiar with Fig and Dan and the Modal Nodes song. And if not, you should ask someone who is familiar to look it up for you. It's great. Han could have sworn the severed arm, not to mention the creature's remaining stump, was still sizzling when the old fool calmly switched his blue laser sword off. Han leaned around the girl in his lap, trying to see what had sparked the fight in the first place. And I know what you're thinking. Wait, he didn't have a girl in his lap in the movie. Well, that's actually in the deleted scenes. A younger human, a blonde teenager, was holed up from the floor looking dazed, then disappeared into one of the cantina's dark pockets. Han had taken up a corner booth back in the shadows, waiting for the right job to lure him out. And, well, okay, it had the added bonus of keeping him out of sight of the people hunting his skin. But clearly, Han should have been more worried about the human girl training her sights on him than he was about Jabba the Hutt's. Han, the girl in his lap began, voice high and breathy. She slid her fingers into his hair and forced him to look at her. You were gone for so long. She was beautiful and charming, that was for sure. Jewel-toned eyes, long pale hair, an outfit Han was sure would result in some interesting tan lines when she stepped outside. And hey, he was never going to shoot down the attentions of a, lady. Well, sir, he cut himself off when he saw the way her brows pulled together. Right. Sarla was the girl in Sereno Spaceport. I think you may remember Sereno Sam, but we haven't gotten to Count Dooku yet, so we can't discuss this on planet. Helene was the...
Oh, I see. Oh, sorry. Sereno. That's what you said.
Yes. Helene was the Twi'lek barkeep at Kalaun who had a thing for captains.
Well, currently Sereno is under Imperial occupation.
Now, Kalaun is a bit of a deep cut because it was actually around in the old role-playing game source books. And I think a few of the novels, maybe some short stories. I don't know. I haven't looked it up, but I know I've seen that name before. And in case you're wondering, Twi'leks are the head tentacle species, and for some reason, all of their women are super attractive. Just the women, though. The guys, not always so much. Sometimes it's weird. Which meant this girl was blank. Mos Eisley Spaceport girl. He shot her a charming, lopsided smile and stroked a knuckle down her cheek. You know how it is. The jobs I get take me to every corner of the galaxy. Sometimes it's just too dangerous to show my face around the usual haunts. A guy like me, he dropped his voice to a dramatic whisper, he just has to keep moving. And here's our scoundrel. And his good friend, the Wookiee Chewbacca. The girl sighed. Everyone's been talking about that spice cargo you had to dump. One of the freighter pilots said Jabba put a price on your head the size of this planet. Han scowled. This dust ball isn't that big. She continued, ignoring him, her fingers moving to fiddle with the collar of his shirt. You must have come back for a reason. A good one? Not a blonde one, he thought, reaching for his drink. Half paying attention to what the girl was saying, he searched the cantina, searching for the kid and the old man, and found them, of course, next to Chewie. Leave it to the Wookiee to cozy right up to them, chatting them up like he hadn't just seen someone else get his fur singed. People only came into this particular canteen if they were looking to book a ship's services, and weren't inclined to tell the Imperials about what they were transporting, on specialty. But really, he thought, what job was going to be worth letting a lunatic with a sword anywhere near his falcon? They had already had to turn down 2 measly jobs hauling goods off planets. The pay was bad and the cargo was hot, literally steaming. Wait. Han may have taken a blow to his rep recently, but he had some professional pride left, thank you very much. One guy had wanted him to haul bantha dung into space to fertilize some other wasteland. No, thank you very much. Okay, false alarm. I thought it was referencing the Tales comic. Chewbacca cut up half back toward Han's booth. If the almost 2.5 meter tall frame of shaggy brown hair didn't clear the way, that's about 7 to 8 feet in case you're curious. The teeth and claws that completed the package did. Very few people knew Chewie had a mushy heart under that warrior's exterior. The Wookiee looked at the girl in Han's lap, then at his friends waiting. Han shrugged. What could he do? Some folks were just born irresistible. But hey, this was the opportunity he'd been waiting for. Meet Chewbacca, my co-pilots. Chewie, meet... Han let his voice trail off, hoping she'd jump in and introduce herself. Instead, she pulled her head back the way a serpent did right before it struck. Elia, he guessed. Chewie groaned. The girl merely stood up, picked up Han's drink, and threw the remainder in his face. It's Jenny, she said, and she tossed her hair over her shoulder and stormed off. Now, You might be wondering, that's a surprisingly normal name for the Star Wars universe. She's named after the actress who plays her. Oh yeah, Jenny from Mos Espa. By the way, Mos Espa is quite a ways away from Mos Eisley, so she really must have loved him to make the trip.
It's not just Mos Espa and Mos Eisley. There's also Mos Pelgo and Mos Illa.
And so many others. We'd be here all day if we covered all the Mosses. We'd be here all day. I say that a lot. His co-pilot snickered as Han used his black vest to wipe his face off. The truth was he did feel bad about his memory slip, not that he would show it. Laugh it up, buddy. Seeing Chewie's look, Han added, Hey, you're the married one. Find me a human girl with Mala's brains and silky hair, and maybe I'll consider it. By the way, just like Chewie is short for Chewbacca, Mala is short for Malatobak. Also, in case you're curious, this is a holiday special reference. Yep, she's still around. If a Wookiee could blush, Chewbacca would have been pink all over. He growled out a question. Han sighed. Yeah, I saw you with that old relic. Do I need to remind you, he doesn't seem to like letting people keep their limbs? Chewie rumbled out a sharp response. Yeah, hard to miss the sword, pal. Of course I know what a lightsaber is. I wonder what antique trash heap he found it in. The lightsaber was the chosen weapon of the Jedi Order, who served as peacekeepers in the Old Republic, pre-Emperor Palpatine's takeover. There was some religious mumbo-jumbo about meditation and something called the Force. Great big wad of nonsense, if you asked Han. Their kind had been extinct so long they were practically ancient history. Han, it was 19 years ago. What's the job? He asked. Chewie barked a response, and Han's eyes found the blonde kid again. The teen was fidgeting, looking around uncomfortably near the bar. Every now and then he straightened his simple pale tunic. His hands were shaking so badly Han was surprised the little guppy didn't spill his drink. Passage? Han repeated, turning back toward Chewie. To the Alderaan system? That was it. Usually when people wanted to hire a smuggler ship, it was to disappear into restricted territory or one of the shadier hubs in hopes of getting lost forever. The Wookiee nodded. Think it'll pay well? Okay, he had standards, but he also needed to pay back one of the galaxy's biggest crime lords. He could be flexible with his standards. Chewie thumped the table as he snarled a response, going on and on about it being easy money. Finally, Han sighed and said, Fine, bring him over. Han took a moment to straighten his vest and leaned back in the booth, eyes scanning the cantina one last time for trouble. Chewie ushered the old man and the kid into seats across the table from him. Han Solo. I'm captain of the Millennium Falcon. Chewie here tells me you're looking for a passage to the Alderaan system. I'm Ben. This is Luke, the old man said, gesturing to the teenager. His calm presence was at complete odds with the kid's barely contained energy. Luke there looked like he was about to jump out of his skin. He was so eager to get going. And yes, indeed, if it's a fast ship. Han scoffed. Fast ship. You've never heard of the Millennium Falcon? And Ben raised a white eyebrow. Should I have? It's the ship that made the Kessel run in less than 12 parsecs. The kid, and like most people who heard the tale, looked impressed. The old man was not, however, most people. Anyway, Han said before he called out on his lie.
Hey, that reminds me. Go see Solo: A Star Wars Story.
I mean, you don't have to if you don't want to. Disney doesn't need more free advertising. But that being said, if you've got a Disney Plus subscription already, I mean, it's definitely not worth buying one just for Solo. But if you have one already, you might as well just look it up, check it out, if out of sheer morbid curiosity, if nothing else. 0.5 past light speed was nothing to sniff at. I've outrun Imperial starships. Not the local bulk cruisers, mind you, I'm talking about the big Corellian ships now. She's fast enough for you, old man. What's the cargo? Ben gave a thoughtful hum before answering. Only passengers. Myself, the boy, 2 droids, and no questions asked. Suddenly, Han had a bad feeling about this job. What is it, some kind of local trouble? Let's just say we'd like to avoid any Imperial entanglements. Well, Han said, leaning forward. Oh, this was going to be easy. That's the real trick, isn't it? And it's going to cost you something extra. 10,000 all in advance. For the first time, the kid, Luke, spoke. 10,000? We can almost buy our own ship for that. Yeah, but who's going to fly it, kid? You? You look like you wouldn't be able to figure out how to retract the landing gear. Never mind, make a jump to hyperspace. You bet I could. I'm not such a bad pilot myself. Luke turned toward Ben and started to stand, anger flaring hot and fast across his face. We don't have to sit here and listen. The old man waved his hand and the kid settled back into his seat. We haven't that much with us, but we could pay you 2,000 now, plus 15 when we reach Alderaan. 17. Han wondered if he needed to clean his ears. You know, if Bail Organa was still alive, I wonder if he'd feel comfortable footing that bill. Okay, you guys got yourselves a ship. We'll leave as soon as you're ready. Docking Bay 94. 94. Ben repeated, nodding. Luke looked unhappy at the arrangement, but managed to hold his tongue this time. Behind them, a flash of light caught Han's eye. 4 uniformed stormtroopers were making their way up to the bar, attracting looks of scorn from the other patrons. Looks like someone's beginning to take an interest in your handiwork. Han tilted his head in the bar's direction. His new passengers turned to look, the kid about jumping out of his skin as the barkeep pointed toward them. It was left to Ben to drag the kid off into the shadows, pulling him toward the back entrance. By the time the stormtroopers looked again, they were gone. Han spun toward Chewie, gripping the silver bandolier across the Wookiee's chest. 17,000. Those guys must be really desperate. Get back to the ship and get her ready. The Wookiee slid out of the booth as Han signaled to the barkeep to close out his tab. Han fought the urge to sag in his seat in relief. The reasonable part of him knew it would only be a matter of time before he found a job to cover the cost of Jabba's lost cargo. But another part of him was starting to lose hope he'd get the credits in hand before a legit bounty hunter found him. It had been plain bad luck that an Imperial customs ship had crossed their paths as they were preparing to leave Kessel with the illegal shipments. And now it was dumb luck that he could cover his rear. Han stood, stretching out a kink in his neck. He took one step forward, right into something hard, cold, something that felt suspiciously like the business end of a blaster. Then he heard an tease. Going somewhere solo? Okay, we're about to meet one of the most inconsistent characters in Star Wars.
Basically, we're about to meet one of the, well, there's many different types of bounty hunters in the galaxy. There's the best, then there's the worst. This guy we're about to meet is one of the worst.
Prepare to laugh at this alien's misfortune. Chapter 8. Han forced a relaxed smile and turned slowly. The face that stared back at him was vivid green, covered in scales and bumps. Black, glassy eyes sat atop a short, trunk-like nose. Greedo. In the grand scheme of bounty hunters and henchmen, the Rodian was about as dangerous as a fly buzzing around a bantha's bottom. Unfortunately, he was on the trigger-happy end of the spectrum of Jabba's hired help. The captain slid back into the booth, relaxing in his seat. If he showed a hint of nerve around this Kraton, even with a gun pointed at him, Han would never forgive himself. As a matter of fact, he told the Rodian, I was just about to go see your boss. But now you can tell Jabba that I've got his money. It's too late, Greedo said, a little too happily for Han's liking. You should have paid him when you had the chance. Jabba's put a price on your head so large that every bounty hunter in the galaxy will be looking for you. I'm lucky I found you first. Han was lucky, too. If it had been a reputable bounty hunter, say Boba Fett, he would have been in a galaxy of trouble. Yeah, Boba Fett, everyone's favorite character. Personally, I think maybe he's just a little bit overrated. Still, he wasn't sure if Jabba's contract on his life had the dead or alive clause, so he wasn't about to go shooting off his mouth. Yeah, but this time I got the money. If you give it to me, I might forget I found you. Greedo leaned across the table. He would have winked if he had a sense of humor. I don't have it with me. Look, it was a little thing getting boarded. Han slowly reached for his gun under the table, sliding it from the holster at his hip. His fingers brushed against the cool metal as he sucked in a lungful of the cantina's warm, smoky air. Okay, here's how we know Greedo's incompetent. This is why people in movies always say hands on the table. Because we know where those hands go if you don't say that. You can tell that to Jabba, Greedo said. He may only take your ship. Now it was Han's turn to sneer. Over my dead body. The Rodian laughed, the sound trumpeting out of his snout as he trained his gun right on Han's heart. That's the idea. I've been looking forward to killing you for a long time. A slow smile spread across the captain's face. Yeah, I'll bet you have. Greedo disappeared in a blinding flash of white light as Han pulled the trigger on his gun. The thump as Greedo's body slumped onto the table made the other cantina patrons look over.
This just in, Han shot first.
And it was self-defense, so completely justified. Poor Greedo, Han thought, glancing down at the smoking corpse as he stood again. Never realized Han could shoot under a table just as well as above it. I said no blasters, the barkeep growled. For your trouble. Han reached into his pocket and flipped him a coin. Sorry about the mess. He couldn't get out of the cantina fast enough. The hot wall of desert air slammed into him as he stepped outside, like walking into an oven, he thought, shielding his eyes from the sun bleeding down overhead. The dust flying through the air was thick that day. An unusual number of stormtroopers, technically sand troopers, were kicking it up in the unpaved streets, dirtying their pristine white uniforms, so they'd blend in with the tan, sun-bleached buildings around them. Now he had a really bad feeling about the job. And that feeling only got worse when he saw Chewie hovering outside the hangar door and heard a deep voice calling to him in Huttese. "Come out, Solo!" His co-pilot glanced back at him, hearing his boots shuffling through the loose sands. "Didn't want to go in alone?" Han asked, patting Chewie's shoulder. "I don't blame you. Let's get it over with." "Solo!" Slithering along the ground like the slug he was, as Jabba waited outside the Millennium Falcon, shouting for Han. A half-dozen of Jabba's henchmen circled the ship. Han crossed his arms over his chest, counting the weapons strapped to each of the thugs. Jabba seemed to be starting a collection of the system's ugliest, with himself as the crown jewel. Han had told Chewie his theory once that, unlike the other life forms, the Hutt hadn't evolved from sparks of life and matter. The galaxy had simply belched them out one day. That's actually a very interesting origin story that, yet again, we don't have the time to get into now.
The Hutts used to rule entire empires long before the Republic or even the Jedi were founded.
Think of them like the ancient Egypt of Star Wars, but without any of the fun, cool stuff. As long as Han was tall and carrying about 5 times Han's weight, the Hutt was a putrid combination of brown and yellow and green skin, all warts and wrinkles, and a drooling tongue he seemed incapable of keeping inside his mouth. Personally, I don't think it makes sense for Jabba to show up in person. A hologram would have done on the job just as fine. "I've been waiting for you, Jabba," Han said, letting his voice echo through the hangar. When Jabba and the others turned, Han felt his stomach flip. The Hutt's gold, reptile-like eyes tracked Han's movements as he came closer. "I expected you would be," Jabba answered. "Well, I'm not the type to run." A solid 60% of the time he wasn't, technically. Jabba liked to talk to him as if Han were his wayward son. Han let him because Han enjoyed keeping his life. "Han, my boy, there are times when you disappoint me. Why haven't you paid me? And why did you have to fry poor Greedo like that?" News traveled fast, it seemed. "You sent Greedo to blast me," Han reminded him. Those gold eyes widened in fake shock. "You're the best smuggler in the business. You're too valuable to fry. He was only relaying my concern at your delays. He wasn't going to blast you." Han waved a hand dismissively. "If you got something to say, come see me yourself." Han, Jabba let out one of his belly laughs, the same kind he gave as he fed slaves to his pet Rancor. Okay, we'll get into the Rancor later, but the point is, tall, loud teeth, big claws, eats people.
Yeah.
"You're my favorite scoundrel, don't you know? You and I are alike. We love money, the smell of it, the feel of it, the weight of it in our pockets. I understand you better than you think." Han recoiled at the thought that he was anything like the slug in front of him. By the way, this is not Han being prejudiced, because Hutts, as a cultural value, really are just the worst. "If only you hadn't had to dump that shipment of spice," Jabba continued. "You understand I can't make an exception. Where would I be if all of my smugglers dumped their shipment at the first sign of an Imperial starship? It's not good for business. I had no choice, but I've got a charter now, and I can pay you back, plus a little extra. I just need some time." 6 more minutes. Han held up his hands. "Come on, how long have I been running for you? And this is the first time I've had to ditch the cargo?" Jabba seemed to consider that. "For an extra, say, 20%, I'll give you a little more time. But this is it. If you disappoint me again, I'll put a price on your head so large you won't be able to go near a civilized system for the rest of your short life." Han gave a little bow, then expertly talked the crime lord down to 15%. How he did that, we'll never know. I guess Jabba's just in a really good mood.
Han, did step on Jabba's tail during the negotiation.
That is not canon. I refuse to accept that Jabba would let Han get away with that. He's never in that good a mood. Always a pleasure to do business with you. Jabba was still laughing as he slithered out of the hangar, the others trailing behind him like faithful pets. Han's stomach didn't unclench until Jabba was gone from sight, and Chewie let out a relieved rumble from deep in his chest. You said it, Han said. Think you would have sold us into slavery or just sent us shooting out into the vacuum of space to watch us pop into little splats? I don't think that's how space works, but once again, I'm not an expert on space. Neither of which would be the worst of what the Hutt had done. What Jabba lacked in looks, he made up for in endless creativity in hiding the bodies of his enemies. Han mopped the sweat off the back of his neck and shuddered. All right, time to get down to work. Let's get her ready to fly. It felt good to get back in the swing of things. He and Chewie ran through all the usual pre-flight checks, recalibrating some of the instruments and charting the course they'd take to the Alderaan system. Han was lovingly polishing one of the control panels when he heard someone say, "What a piece of junk!" The kid, of course. Clearly that one was fresh off the moisture farm if he couldn't recognize the beauty of the Falcon's fine lines. The YT series was the height of Corellian engineering genius. A triumph. Maybe she was getting on in age. Probably 70 years old at this point?
Probably 70, but depending on its looks, much older.
I don't know, maybe 100, 130. I really need to reread the Millennium Falcon novel. By the way, there's a Millennium Falcon novel.
Yeah, well, the Millennium Falcon's actually younger than it appears. How it appears is much older than it actually is.
Blame all the battle damage. Maybe she was getting on in age, and some of her plates didn't match. Maybe he hadn't been able to paint over some of the worst scorch marks, but so what? It was what was inside that counted most. Han didn't have much good in his life. Aside from Chewie, his ship was the only thing that he could count on in a real fight. She was the love of his life. Had been from the moment he won her from another scoundrel in a game of cards. I mean, technically he cheated, but the other scoundrel was cheating too. And if the sand rat didn't stop insulting her, he was going to find himself blasted back down to Tatooine in an escape pod. Han walked down the boarding ramp to meet them.
Or probably sent floating through space.
She'll make 0.5 beyond the speed of light. She may not look like much, but she's got it where it counts, kid. I've added some special modifications myself. Luke scratched his head, shooting the old man an uncertain look. Han closed his eyes and counted to 10. 17,000, he reminded himself. If it was a choice between Jabba slowly feeding pieces of him to a pit of acid, or dealing with a little punk, he could deal with the punk. We're a little rushed, Han said, sweeping his hands toward the ramp. So if you'll hurry along, we'll get out of here. Trailing behind the humans were two droids, one a golden humanoid prodigal droid who shuffled forward on stiff limbs and surveyed the hangar with round glowing eyes, the other a white cylindrical astromech droid on 3 legs with a silver domed head and blue detailing. Its small alert light flashed blue and red as it swiveled its head around. Both looked like they'd been rolling around the dunes for days. Han waited until they were all on board before starting up the ramp behind them. He cast one last look over his shoulder. One more trip back. After he got his money, he'd make one final trip to that pit to deliver it to Jabba. And then, he'd make sure to keep a few systems behind him and the Hutts. Stop that ship! Han did a double take, spinning around. The thunder of feet and clattering armor was his only warning before stormtroopers poured into the hangar. Their blaster rifles were already up. Blast him! The one out front ordered. Stormtroopers. Firm policy of dead first, alive if you have to. Han swore in 3 different languages as he ducked up the ramp, chased by bolts of energy burning the air around him.
You know, that does remind me of a Mandalorian saying, strike first, talk later.
Brutes, the lot of them. He turned back and fired with his own blaster. Throwing himself up through the overhead door, he slammed his palm against its release button. The stormtrooper's shots glanced off the Millennium Falcon shields. Chewie, Han called as he rushed past the holding area. He glanced around to make sure their passengers were buckling in. Get us out of here! His co-pilot roared back from the cockpit, drowning out the prodigal droid's snooty, "Oh my, I'd forgotten how much I hate space travel." The Falcon was already clear of the hangar by the time Han collapsed into the pilot's seat. his hands flying across the console. They rose above the dingy, sand-lit buildings of Mos Eisley, heading into the early afternoon sky. Never got old seeing the way the sky purpled and darkened as they blasted out of the atmosphere. That was why Han loved flying. And pulling off a narrow escape wasn't such a bad feeling either. Han had barely sat down in the pilot's chair next to Chewie when the Wookiee pointed to the sensor scope, growling out a warning. Han's stomach clenched at the sight of the large blip rapidly approaching them as they broke clear of Tatooine's atmosphere and entered the black gaping mouth of outer space. It was like an Imperial cruiser, he said with a grimace. Our passengers must be outer than I thought. Try and hold them off. Angle the deflector shield while I make the calculations for the jump to light speed. As his hands flew over the navigation console, so Han was vaguely aware of the silver and blue astromech droid rolling past the open cockpit door, beeping out what sounded like a few questions. Ignored, he rolled away, headed toward Luke and Ben to slip into a small space beside 3PO. Wait, how does Han know 3PO's name but not R2's?
I don't know. Maybe 3PO was mentioned, but R2 wasn't.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll never know. Anyways, so, yeah, we've hit the 1 hour mark. So we're gonna wrap up now, and I just want to give a final disclaimer. I've had some comments that I would get more views and reach a wider audience if I added some tags in the description and stuff like that. Thing is, we really don't, right? We're just keeping this in the family and close friends. We don't need every random person on the internet seeing this. Force knows they probably would not have nice things to say. And plus, they're probably out watching a bunch of the other Star Wars podcasts, like, I don't know, Fanalysis. Anyways, so we hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you again, well, sometime before next week, we promise.